Good Friday afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Golden Black Live, and our special guests. They're always special when Matt Stevens and Brian Neubert are seated here because they're contractually obligated. They're here. I don't know if there's no contract, but we're glad you're here, and we'll be talking Purdue, Missouri. And today's show, Jason Wiedekofer will join us in segment 2, and Larry Clisby will join us from via the phone for segment 3. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, on the hill but on the level, of Purdue tradition since 1929. I was there, didn't eat lunch there today, but I was around there. There are lots of folks running around State Street these days at Triple X, and John Basham and the good folks at Basham Reynolds. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, State HDI tonight, and State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. All right, Brian, one of your old adages has always been, it's never as good as it seems, it's never as bad as it seems. Purdue is in that mode maybe now. It looks bleak with 0-2, but the Boilermakers have a big opportunity in front of them, them on Saturday night when Missouri comes to town.
Don't you have to be really old to have adages?
I'm
not that old.
But you're 40.
You're older than I am.
If I do have adages, that would be one of my adages.
Okay.
Yes.
I think you're
because
right.
I just think over a long period of time, that's so often been the case, where just when you think everything is so unbelievably bleak, it turns out to not be. Just when you think everything's awesome, it's not. And I always think somewhere in the middle, the truth sort of lies. And right now, Purdue is 0-2, and that's what people see. They see Purdue's played 2 games and lost both of them, and that's not what was expected this season. Obviously, the last one being a particularly bad one, it being Eastern Michigan. But I just think you've lost 2 games by 5 points, both of which any number of different things that Purdue had complete control over that just went sideways on it in the heat of the moment. Any of those things go different, you're at least 1-1, maybe even 2-0. Now, at Northwestern, I don't think there's any chance they take the ball at the end and go down the field and win the game the way they were playing offensively. But it was within the realm of possibility. And if you don't throw a couple of turnovers that were way out of character for the quarterback who threw them, that could be an entirely different ballgame. Obviously, Purdue had the game against Eastern Michigan won several times. Even if you win that game looking bad against Eastern Michigan, I don't know how much better you're feeling about things than you are right now anyway. But I just think so many little things have added up to big things, but they're also little things that can turn around real quick. I'm not necessarily saying for certain they will, but I'm saying they can.
Yeah, Matt, you had some news yesterday afternoon toward the end of practice, or at least some point during practice, with Elijah Sindelar's injury undisclosed, but that if he does not play, and it's sounding like he may not, against Missouri, that can be a game changer, or at least a changer in terms of what Jeff Brom may try to do. How do you take that?
There's 2 instances of this. One is that I do believe no matter what, we'll know by warm-ups if Elijah Sindelar is going to play on Saturday night. If he even tries to warm up, Jeff Brom's going to leave it all the way up to warm-ups if he's going to play. I do think David Blau is going to start. He's practiced all week. Sindelar has not.
Yeah.
And so there's an idea that, obviously you're going to give the senior the opportunity to start this game. The second caveat, I don't necessarily agree with you, Al, because we got a different Jeff Brom on Thursday who evaluated last Saturday's version of Jeff Brom and didn't like what he saw.
Yeah.
And so he goes, I'm never going to coach like that again. He almost sounded like a guy who admitted, I coached not to lose against Eastern Michigan with the fear of losing more than the idea of trying to win the ball game. We can't do that against Missouri. We can't do that, obviously, in Jeff Brom's words, in the last 10 opponents they have, because they're all going to be better than Eastern Michigan. So I think you're going to see a more aggressive Jeff Brom. I think you're going to see a more aggressive game plan, even if David Blau is the quarterback. And it would be hard to not be more aggressive with David Blau with the amount of throws that he's had down the field this season. But I do think that Purdue is going to have to figure out a way offensively to be more dynamic no matter who's at quarterback. And I don't think that they can play a conservative ball control, keep Drew Lock and those receivers off the field type of game. Jeff Brom basically has said, hey, we got to score points. And that's really the only way that Purdue feels like that they can really stay competitive early on in this ball game and kind of change the momentum on a Saturday night at Ross-Ade Stadium with a more dynamic offense, maybe get an early lead, and just try to keep putting up offensive points to kind of counter what Missouri can do.
Brian, last year's game is weighing on this year's game for a couple of reasons, I guess. One, Purdue won easily in Columbia, 35-3 scored. I think the first 3 times it had the ball. Elijah Sindelar, who did, David Blau was actually more of the star of the show, though Sindelar I think had the longest pass last year, that 54-yarder to Cole Herdman. I guess my question is, how do you take that? Because Missouri remembers that game, and they know that this game is important as well. But you can't just throw out the fact that Purdue did a good job on Locke last year.
Yeah.
He did not, 12 for 28 to 133 yards. They did not move the football. I mean, what do you take? What is everyone's talking about what Missouri's going to do because they are mad because they were embarrassed or whatever term you want to use. How does Purdue use last year's win, if at all, tomorrow night?
Well, why shouldn't you have confidence? I mean, you're reading all this stuff about how awesome Missouri is right now. You're reading all this stuff about how basically you have John Elway walking in here tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
But the same Purdue team, obviously a different Purdue team, but still Purdue, and the same Missouri team,
Yeah.
a different Missouri team, but still Missouri, and Purdue was 32 points better than them on their home field a year ago at this time. And it has to give you confidence. It completely contradicts all of the pregame narratives about this.
Yeah.
Obviously, both teams are different, but 32 points is a pretty big margin. And I know Purdue caught Missouri at the right time last year, and I know it looks like Missouri's catching Purdue at the right time this year. But there is success to be drawn on for Purdue tomorrow night. I thought Purdue really, in the sense of them catching Missouri at the right time, defensively they just fired their coordinator. Their defense was a mess. Drew Lock had no reason to be a mess. He just played bad. Purdue just did a good job on him. And I know he's put up great numbers through 2 games so far. I know the NFL thinks what the NFL thinks about him. What's to say that doesn't happen again tomorrow night? And that's what kind of gives me pause about all these blowout predictions. And when I say stuff like, I know it looks really bad, but when things look bad, sometimes they're really not that bad.
And Matt, we looked at Locke's numbers, which have been pretty phenomenal. But he's had, since the Purdue game and during their streak, had a couple games where he was under 200 yards. He's had a lot when he's been way over that. And you saw him last year also in person, I assume, when covering Auburn in a pretty disastrous Missouri. Auburn beat them back.
The week after
Right.
Purdue beat them 35-3, Auburn came in and beat them. I think it was 52-14 or something. Yeah. And Barry Odom goes nutso in the press conference, and I'm leaving Columbia thinking that man's not long for that job.
Yeah.
And they turn around and win 6 in a row and or 5 in a row and get to 6-6. All of that though is a little bit deceiving. And what I say by that is that if you're in the SEC East, I can say this from experience. It's kind of like being in the Big Ten West. You're not in the murderer's row division of the SEC. Right. You can knock off teams like Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas, all of which were ready to quit and ready to fire their coach, which is exactly what Barry Odom did to get to the Texas Bowl. I say that to say this. I think the one thing that I'm sure of that Purdue has an advantage of is on their sideline with Jeff Brom and his coaching staff against Barry Odom and his coaching staff, because I do think that if they can get an early lead, Jeff Brom has an ability to inspire his team and play, and Nick Holt has an ability to inspire his defense beyond what Barry Odom can do. It is still underrated, in my opinion, what Gary Pinkel did at Missouri over all those years. And I don't think that the fan base at Missouri still feels uberly confident with 2 things: Barry Odom's ability to get to that 9-10 win plateau that the Missouri fans want to get to, and with Missouri's defense, because they have not seen an offense that's as dynamic as what Jeff Brom can scheme it up to be. And so I think that those are the 2 things that if you're a Purdue fan, you should feel good about going into Saturday night, because I think you have an advantage.
Yeah. Ryan, do you look at Blau, the fact that he's likely to get the majority of the snaps? We've kind of I don't know if he's fallen in the trap, but dismissed some of the things he can do and bring to the table. I mean, this is a guy that has had games where he's thrown for a lot of yards, has had games where he's moved the offense. I mean, it's not like Purdue's going to be playing with it with one arm tied behind its back.
Got all sorts of problems with my eye.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, how about your ears?
Ears are okay.
No,
the thing that would concern me from a Purdue perspective is David Blau can do some very good things. Elijah Sindelar can do some very good things. The things you need to do very well tomorrow, most likely, falling in line with what Jeff Brom told them yesterday
Right.
about really seemingly wanting to cut things loose a little bit, how he coached not to lose against Eastern Michigan. Those are the things Elijah Sindelar does well. And if you don't have Elijah Sindelar tomorrow, perhaps there's an imbalance here with what you need and what you have. But I do think, Purdue ran the ball very effectively against Eastern Michigan. They should have beat Eastern Michigan that way. They didn't. They're going to need to do more than that to beat Missouri. And I just think what they have to do to beat Missouri jives much more with what Elijah Sindelar could theoretically do if he were available, as opposed to what David Blau can do. But David Blau has a body of work behind him, and he's been productive in games like this before.
And I'll add
he started the Missouri game last year.
And I'll add to that, Al, because I think you take the X's and O's part of it, and then also you take the emotional aspect of it, of a desperate Purdue team at 0-2, who we know will play their butt off for David Blau. He's a co-captain for a reason.
Yeah.
He's a lead. He's all we've heard is how great of a leader David Blau is, and everybody else, from Kirk Barron all the way down to everybody who plays offense. We know on Saturday night they will play their butt off for David Blau if he has to go the entire game, and he has a body of work that says against a very, very similar personnel-wise Mizzou defense, I can do some things.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of emotional components that kind of side toward Purdue if they want to do the us versus the world type of thing. And I think David Blau might be the leader you'd want in that kind of a situation.
Yeah. Well, if you're a Purdue fan, you have to hope that that's the case. Okay, number 4, Rondale Moore, and X Factor. We all just, anybody that likes to watch college football likes to see him with the ball in his hands. Maybe a little bit nicked up. We don't know necessarily on that front, but he can be obviously an X factor. I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, I don't think if you're the most talented player on the team and the biggest weapon on the team, I don't think you can be the X factor.
Yeah.
I think that means you're the alpha.
Right.
But I think obviously.
But don't you think he was? Well, I mean, the 53
Purdue needs to make big plays tomorrow, and if they maybe don't have the quarterback in there who's best suited to do that, throwing the ball vertically, the best way to do it is by getting creative, by getting the ball to a dynamic player in space, getting the ball to a dynamic player on the move, and obviously that jives with Rondale Moore's pretty significant skill set. That being said, everybody knows that Purdue wants to get the ball to Rondale Moore. They're not just going to let him do it. So Purdue's going to have to execute well to get him the ball, but also come up with perhaps some different ways to do it.
And he can change the dynamic of this game now.
And he has to be healthy.
Yeah, I mean, Big Ten Network and all of their media glory put out a graphic this week that says, which player in the league do you fear the most? And Rondale Moore at 0-2 at Purdue was among Jonathan Taylor, Dwayne Haskins, Trace McSorley, and Brian Lewicki. So the quarterback at Michigan State. So at that point, you're promoted. He's not an X factor because he's one of the best dynamic athletes in the league.
That's an incorrect term.
But if Purdue's going to win this ball game, Rondale Moore has to be probably the best player on the field. And I feel like, and it has to play like it. And that's a lot to ask for a guy in his third college game. But if Purdue's going to get a W, that's probably what you got to have happen.
I also think Jared Sparks is a pretty damn good player.
Yeah,
yes.
I do too.
And now I know it's interesting because his brother might be guarding him, but I also think that he might be that guy too. But Purdue has guys who can do things. Terry Wright can do things. Isaac Zico conceivably can do something. Those tight ends have been quiet to this point. They may not stay quiet. We don't know. Purdue's made big plays in the running game. They're just not finishing the big runs. They're getting the 40-yard runs. They're just not scoring on them. And that sort of created the red zone issues, through these first couple of weeks. But Purdue's capable of making big plays. They just got to do it. They got to find ways against this particular defense to do it as well.
Poor Jared Sparks on Rondale Moore's 53-yard run was not credited with the tackle, but he probably should have been. So and that's bad luck or misfortune in that standpoint.
Well, it's also Rondale Moore's fault because when you're so quick, when you're so unpredictable in your movements, your explosiveness athletically, nobody can predict where you're going.
Yeah.
If it were somebody slower and less dynamic, you could run up the field and you could get in a spot because you know that's where they're going to be.
Welcome to Purdue football, where Rondale Moore gets blamed for a 53-yard run.
Yeah,
it is.
Right, I know.
In a roundabout way, it's his fault.
And how far would it? Because I don't even know what was the line of scrimmage. So would that have been an 85?
I fully believe he might have been able to take it all the way.
No,
to the
I know he
house.
would have. I think it's pretty clear on.
I thought you were talking about how many yards.
No, what was the line of scrimmage in the play? I think it was the 15. It would have been been an 85-yard run, and he is already. We did some looking up of his length of his runs already. A 76-yarder and a 53-yarder so far in weeks 1 and 2 is very, very impressive. All right, offensive line shakeup, Matt. You have at least some changes there, maybe some additional ones that we may not be aware of yet. that we'll be watching when the Boilermakers line up for the first time at about 7:40 on Saturday night. What factor does that play? Because on paper, some of Missouri's biggest strength in defensive tackles, and maybe it's line play, though that can be debated.
Right.
What do they need to do from that standpoint to help the Boilermakers in your view?
Well, it's the reshuffle of the shuffle,
Yeah.
because what Purdue was willing to say earlier this week was that Matt McCann's going to get kicked out to right tackle,
Right.
and then Shane Evans is going to move to left guard, which moves Dennis Edwards to right guard. That was what we thought was going to happen with the starting five going forward, and based off the first two games, Purdue's used the starting five offensive line for every snap of their game. Now we get to Thursday, and we talk to Jeff Brom, and he goes, well, we might have to shuffle the reshuffle because they've had some nicks over the last few days when they've been in full pads, and so I don't know if they have to go back to what they were doing before with Eric Swingler at right tackle and then just kind of kick Mac McCann back in at guard. Do they have to do that? But I don't know who the quote unquote nicks are with.
Yeah.
But if they're not with, if it's Shane Evans still can't physically go, that's the latter is what I think they'll show on Saturday night. But it is and Brian was out at practice with me as well. Purdue's intent is to use the starting five that they started the week with, which was, again, Matt McCann out at right tackle, Shane Evans at left guard. And that's where they think they feel like they're the most effective, especially in the pass game, because no matter who's at quarterback, they feel like they want to throw the ball vertically down the field a little bit more. And whoever it is, probably David Blau, needs more time in the pocket to do that. And they have to start feeling better about their left and right tackle in order to do that.
Yeah, interesting study on that front. And obviously Shane Evans, fair amount of experience last year with the Purdue offensive line. Brian, what else jumps at you, in terms of from the defensive end? The 6 sacks last week, Jeff Brom mentioned that being, I don't think he said it was that was a false statistic because they did have them, but it was a different dynamic because it still did not help Purdue slow down truly effectively shut down Eastern Michigan's passing game. I mean, they did cause some pressure.
Well, it got them to the point where they should have won the game twice.
By making sacks.
By making sacks. You had to bring your linebackers to do it, but I think that's just Purdue's reality.
Yeah.
Purdue isn't going to have that guy coming off the edge who's going to be that player, I don't think. When you look at the plays Kai Higgins did make, I think they tried to cut him or something like that.
Yeah.
He just ran past him. I don't know if Purdue has that guy who's just going to beat the person in front of him and get to the quarterback. Yet, anyway, it's possible somebody develops into that player in time. But as of right now, I think Purdue's going to have to keep its linebackers very heavily involved in that part of it. It did make some plays, but we'll see what happens. If it continue to do so against better competition, and if they can capitalize on those moments when it does make the plays. Because as I said, they made those plays twice against Eastern Michigan. Should have won the game off of both of them. Obviously, whatever transpired afterwards went sideways on them. So making game-changing plays like that don't matter if they don't change the game.
Yeah, got to win the game.
That's really kind of off to the side in terms of the relevance of your question. But it was good to see them make some plays. Obviously, it's going to be huge. I don't think it solved anything. I don't think you look at their pass rush now and say everything's fine.
I agree.
Because the opponents are going to get better, the offensive lines are going to get better, the coaching is going to get better. They're going up against. It's going to be an issue all year long. It is just where Purdue is right now. You cannot take their, like I said on the show 2 weeks ago, you cannot take their defensive line and make Giovanni Revere 2 years older. You can't make them, so-and-so 30 pounds heavier and X number of pounds stronger. It's just they're young, they're thin, and they just have to eat it this year. Yeah. These guys have to get better.
And get better, yeah.
Right, they have to get better every week. They have to get better from year to year, and they have to grow into something better than they are right now.
It's not fake news, Al, but it might be fake news against Missouri because how many times is Purdue going to be afford to be able to blitz their linebackers, especially Cornell Jones and Marcus Bailey, when you might have to cover with 6 and 7 all night long?
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing tomorrow, and whether they can put any level of pressure on Locke, who has not been sacked so far in 2018. All right, we will take a 2-minute break and bring in Jason Biedico for Purdue's Deputy Athletic Director. Really interesting perspective, not only on Purdue football, a sport he administrates, but also just kind of the direction of Purdue athletics. And Jason, nobody better to give that take, and we will look forward to doing that. Larry Clisby will also join us at 2:40, so stay tuned, and we'll be back in a couple minutes on Gold and Black Live.